Hey everyone, we're getting back into the swing of recording, and as always, we need your questions. So, here's a quick rundown of all of the recordings that are coming up. Money and morality, specifically as related to taxes, who should pay taxes, why we pay taxes, all that sort of thing. Wedding culture, what's weird, what's culty, what's changing about it. The culture of Puerto Rico, take that as expansively as you'd like, but we are pegging it to Bad Bunny's performance at the Super Bowl. Chain restaurants, what's changed, what's the same. Also thinking about supply chains and how they work with chain restaurants. Dark academia, this one's going to be really good. Momfluencers, what's different, what you've noticed, what's changing. And then life after cars. So you can submit your questions at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod. And that's also where you can submit ideas for future episodes and anything you want for the Ask Anna Anything segment. Our guest hosts always comment on how thoughtful and smart your questions are, so we're very excited to see what you come up with. Okay, on with today's show. This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
Hi, I'm Elliot Haspel. I'm a child and family policy expert and author of the book Raising a Nation, 10 Reasons Every American Has a Stake in Childcare for All.
You know, we sent out this question that was like, listeners, send us your question about making a family-friendly society, or what would that actually look like? And the most popular answer by far was some variation of, why does the school day end at 3:30 but work ends at 5? This sucks.
Yep.
And all of its different iterations, and also questions about the length of the school year and that sort of thing. And, you know, that question is pointing at so many different things, but I wonder if we can talk just to start about why is this the number one thing that comes to people's mind when we talk about a family-friendly society?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a mismatch, right? Like it's a fundamental time mismatch and it causes so many challenges. And it's interesting because there's the historical answer, like the long historical answer, but
Totally.
I like this question because it also, I think, gets us to that fundamental disconnect that we have in America. So the short long historical answer is that this is a vestige of the 19th century compulsory school laws, and we had more agrarian society, and these kids need to get back to the farms, and that and some child development experts at the time didn't think kids should be in school for that long. So there are those reasons. What I think is always interesting, though, and I like this question because it gives me a reason to talk about 1971, which is my favorite thing to talk about in childcare. So I'm not going to give the sort of super
You
long...
and every other child care historian.
Yes.
It's such a big year.
It's a big year. Can I tell the story real quick?
Yes, please.
So in 1971, you have this bill called the Comprehensive Child Development Act, and it would have started to create a federally funded, locally run network of childcare programs, and importantly, it also would have funded after school and summer care. This was really a time when, we had huge changes going on in the economy. Women and mothers were flooding into the workforce because you couldn't really sustain a one income household anymore. Women were gaining rights, and so big changes in America and across the developed world. And so this bill passes Congress. Actually, it passes the House, it passes the Senate, bipartisan basis, right?
It passes
Congress. Yes, it shows up on Richard Nixon's desk, and Richard Nixon at that time actually was like hemming and hawing because he came into office talking about some family stuff. Talking about and so he shows up on his desk, and the story basically goes, at the time, he's getting a lot of pressure from the right wing because he was engaging with China, and there's talk about a conservative primary, in the next election and things like that. And basically, Pat Buchanan gets in his ear, right? And Pat Buchanan, convinces him to veto the thing. And he vetoes it in this exceptionally strong language, right? This exceptionally strong language, saying that to do this, in as many words as says, would be to commit the moral authority of the federal government over that of the family. And this would have created a network of voluntary childcare programs and funded after school and summer care. This isn't forcing anyone to do anything, but it gets in the water, right? This idea, and I actually, it's interesting. This bill comes up later, in following years, and you had this flyer went the viral version of the 1970s saying that it was going to let kids unionize and sue their parents if their parents made them take out the trash or go to church. I'm not kidding. This is literally what people thought that the federal government was trying to do. And so we basically have this schism, right, where government goes onto one side and the family goes onto the other side. And it's a relatively modern invention. It really came out in the 70s. But as a result, all of the energy around things like creating a good childcare system, about creating a universal system of after school, or before school care or summer care that could go around the school year and the school day, extending school day, that all went out the window. And we're
Yeah.
still really, really fighting that legacy today of this idea that, the government doesn't have any role to play in childcare.
Yeah, yeah. And even like the understanding, which aligns with some of these, like, the government should get out of childcare, like the understanding of funding as partisan,
Hmm.
right? When it was not previously. So this, I want to tee up our first question, first like actual listener question, because it's going to allow us to talk about, I think, how some of like our understandings of what is actually family friendly are
Hmm.
coded. So let's start from this question from Kim.
I think the biggest disconnect with creating family friendly societies is the definition of what a family friendly society is. For a set of people, usually from an explicit or quasi religious place, specifically, of course, conservative Christian, this means jobs for men and no options for childcare besides mom and maybe grandma or a small co op of other moms. Whereas for others, it would mean robust parental leave, high quality accessible childcare, hybrid work options, generous sick leave policy, etc. How do we even begin to bridge that gap?
I see this pop up so much, and I think people who maybe haven't lived in places where this ethos is very prominent might think of it as, I don't know, like satire almost. But there really is a strong strain that any policy that quote unquote encourages mothers to be outside of the home is not actually family friendly,
Hmm.
right? That it's a destructive force for the family. So I wonder if you can like break down these two understandings of like what kind of family policy directives are trying to protect, or you see where I'm going here.
I do see where you're going there. Yeah, it is such a good point. I think what's interesting underneath that, my question is always like, what are the values that are being asserted, right? And I think
Yeah.
when you kind of
Yeah.
unpack it some, what the value is this idea that like family is the cornerstone of society. And so we want to have strong families that are able to pass on values and traditions and stories to the next generation, essentially the social reproduction. And that when I have these conversations with people, because I've as well, and I've heard plenty of there are politicians that will say this unabashedly out
Yeah.
loud, right? Like I think that's what's underneath it. Is this idea that
Yeah.
if we do this, if we are encouraging, women outside of the home, it's going to break down the family. What I think is interesting is that when you actually assert the idea that a good childcare system can strengthen families, it can make people really sit up straight because there's a way
Yeah.
in which saying, look, if what you're getting at is the idea that every family should have the care that they need to be able to raise their kids the way that they want. Like that, and that is a value statement, and I think most people agree with it. It leads you on interesting paths because then you have to ask that same person, right? Okay, well, if you've got, and I've interviewed and done focus groups like stay-at-home dads who are like, we had this conversation. My wife and I were like, we really wanted someone home, with the children to be able to, have more touch points with them and to be able to raise them in the way that we thought was best. And I remember one dad told me, and my wife looked at me, we were sitting on the porch, and she said, "It's not going to be me." And so, right, this idea that like, okay, like we can have two things can be true. Like, yes, we need strong families. Yes, we need strong relationships, and yes, children need stable, parents with good, ability to be present. And what that's going to mean is, in some cases, we're going to need to support stay-at-home parents. In some cases, that means that it's best for those kids to have both of their parents out doing something that they find meaningfully fulfilling and coming back at the end of the day, like charged up and ready to engage, right? And so
Yeah.
where I find is challenging is this sort of question, and where I think the argument on the far right kind of falls apart is I'm like, choice has to cut both ways. I,
Well,
yeah.
okay. So the first thing I would say is that I think a lot of people on the far right do not actually believe in the libertarian ethos that everyone should have the right to raise their kids
Mm,
however they want, because they think like queer parents should not have
uh,
the right to
yes.
raise their kids, right? Like they pathologize single parenthood, especially single parenthood by
Hmm.
choice, Um, and the whole cloth ethos of like a family is everyone, right? It's like it's also grandparents, and it's also like how do we take care of other people in our extended family? Like that
Mm-hmm.
falls apart. It's so focused on the nuclear family that is straight and has two parents and one income.
Mm-hmm.
And like, but then they say, like, I should have the freedom to raise
Yes.
my kids however I want and not
Mm-hmm.
expose them to the propaganda of, like, say, public schooling, right?
Yes. Government
So like
schooling.
that's always my frustration.
Yes.
Like if we can get on board that like okay, we should like people should be able to raise their
Yes.
kids in a way that they feel is fit so long as it's not breaking any laws.
Mm-hmm.
But they like for them, like you said, like this sword doesn't cut both ways.
It
Like
doesn't.
they for them and theirs, but not for us and ours.
Yes. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think that in some ways that's an argument that we have to be able to win. I do think there is
Yeah.
this sort of way in which, though, ideas that they've asserted have gotten into a lot of the mainstream ideas. And, it's interesting. I'll say, like, I have a very conservative, like Christian conservative family member who I talked about childcare a fair amount. And, like, their thing is, like, yes, I think it would be better if all mothers stayed home with their family. My wife didn't, right? But then they're like, look, if you have a childcare idea or policy that is going to support stay-at-home parents and also offer these other options, like I can basically reluctantly get on board with that. That's basically their conclusion.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I think about how so many churches have what they call like mom's day out,
Yeah.
where it's like a couple hours of daycare. And like, that's okay. Right. Like, that is sanctioned for you
Yes.
to have part time childcare. It's just that you can't like have a full time job. And it also just leads me to all of this research about like, so many people do want to provide elder care, say, because this is going to be
Mm-hmm.
something that's part of
Oh
our
yeah.
conversation as we're
Yeah.
moving forward about how a family friendly society is actually
Mm-hmm.
one that's also friendly to elder care. But they don't want to be the only person doing it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this applies to, I think, all kinds of care. Like if you're caring for a disabled partner, if
Mm-hmm.
you are caring for kids, you just don't want to be the only person doing it all of the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, what is the escape valve? A lot of people want to do that work, but they just need help. And
Yeah.
that's what we don't provide.
No, that's right. It's why, like, and I argue a lot. We need to assert care as a right. Like, we need to assume
Right.
rights language, and we need to challenge anyone to say, why shouldn't that be? Because if it is just this nice to have thing or this pay to play system, and if you happen to be wealthy, congratulations, you can hire, to your point, right? You can hire help. You can,
Totally.
because who we don't look down on is the wealthy people who are all hiring nannies to raise their kids for them, right? Like, they don't get any approbation from us. So I think
Well,
that's
which is so funny, right? Like, I think they like it's liberals actually. There is some like opprobrium from like liberals who are like, "Oh, must be nice to have the privilege to have a
yes,
nanny." You know what I mean?
yes,
Like that, and I understand it, but like conservatives aren't saying to Donald Trump like, "Oh, did nannies help raise your
yeah,
kids?"
exactly.
You know?
No, that's right. So I think certainly the sort of universal rights language is potentially a way out of that. And I think it has to be pluralistic, right? That's the other thing about, to your point about,
Yeah.
other care too. Like, I think as someone who is avowedly on the left, right, like we get into trouble when we actually sort of, I think, say we only want in childcare, like licensed, childcare centers. We only want pre-K. We don't actually want to support family members or grandparents or stay-at-home parents.
Yeah.
Like, I think we do have a tendency sometimes to look down on that, as opposed to saying, look, it's all care. It's all happening. It should all be supported. Children can develop healthily in any of those settings. And we need a system
Yeah.
that supports it. And it's not going to look exactly the same, because the way you support a grandparent, the way you support a stay-at-home parent, and the way you support a child care center are necessarily going to look different. It's going to cost different amounts of money. But can we have
Yeah.
a system where everyone can get the care that they want and need? That would be a huge, advance.
Okay, so let's tease up our next question, which I think we'll get to a fundamental problem. This comes from Carrie.
We don't have to invent all that many policies or practices in this area if we don't want to. There are a lot of models we could quickly adapt with a lot of bang for our buck. When you fly into the airport in Lisbon, there are family-only lines, so parents don't have to hold their toddlers on their hips for 3 hours in line for passport control. I'm looking at you, Newark Airport. Restaurants in many cities in Europe have play areas for kids, so there's something for them to do while you wait for the meal. So many places abroad are built with strollers and wheelchairs in mind. Surely planners and policymakers travel too. And yet, in the US, we just don't do this. It seems deliberate. My question is thus less how we can make our society more family friendly, but why don't we? I have theories about cultural preferences for fairness and plain old misogyny, but I shouldn't answer my own question.
I love that Carrie starts to answer her own question. You have done so much work closely studying the way that family-friendly policy works in other nations. So that's part of why I wanted to have you answer this question, because like you have I have read your work on all of these different ways, things that we could adopt. So why don't we?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, I think look, Carrie's there obviously is misogyny. There obviously is some of that's going on, no doubt. I think part of it, quite honestly, is there's not that much of a constituency for it. What I mean by that, I don't mean that there aren't constituent parents, but like, when's the last time that a parent called up a congressperson or a city council person and said, look, the stroller infrastructure in this city sucks, or we need to have airport with like family lanes. Like, it's just not there's not been an organized constituency. I actually think it's a really potentially fruitful area, and interestingly, this is a place where there could be some bipartisanship, and I use that word with full awareness of the moment that we are in. But there's a conservative thinker who I am friendly with named Patrick Brown, and he's written about these ideas of like, look, there should be playgrounds at every rest stop on every highway in America, right? Like, that's like a proper use of public funds. And though I think there's actually some sort of strange bedfellows that could be had around that, but you're right. What it comes down to is, and my colleague I work with, Joe Waters, talks a lot about this, is what's the ethic sort of within a culture about where family is placed. So in Italy, it's literally in the Italian constitution that the one of the purposes of the Italian government is to support healthy family life. And so, like that, like what that says, that's not a policy, but that is a statement of values that you can then go down to. We're going to have these things that are family friendly. But you're right, absolutely. There are so many things, and we could go down the list: the family lanes in the airport, the lack of stroller infrastructure, the fact that public pools in most places now have incredibly short hours and short years that they're open. I mean, we could go down the list. There are so many things, and these aren't actually giant P policies. Like fixing childcare will cost hundreds of billions of dollars. Fixing like airport lanes and stroller infrastructure and splash pads, like that's not going to break the bank, but it does require becoming a priority. And in public policy, everything is always fighting for attention and energy and funds within a finite circle. And so part of the question is, how do we get parents organized around this? And if they're not even organized right now writ large around bigger things like childcare.
Right. Well, and it strikes me that so much of this has now been like shunted onto the private sphere or onto like the corporate.
Yes.
Like in airports, like the fact that the pumping rooms were like, at least until recently, I haven't seen them recently, but it was like a company that paid to have like pumping rooms that were like little, I don't know, like a size of a box that you could go into, but it was like advertising for this company. So of course the airport and like the infrastructure of the airport was not paying to actually construct a place where moms could pump. It was like, well, let's have the private sphere take care of this. And we know that that's not
No.
It doesn't go well.
No.
Or even like I'm thinking of regulations too that have just like disincentivized the development of any sort of third spaces or third public spaces where you don't have to buy something in order to be there.
Yeah, there's also like this proliferation of sort of places also that aren't just even culturally aren't even friendly towards kids. They don't, in the restaurants or the breweries are like no kids allowed, like that. In a way, we're becoming more hostile to the idea of families with young children, or families with children generally, and that is, I think, that's a real challenge, and it's a choice in a lot of ways, but some of it comes again from the top down of when lawmakers are making a policy. For example, like there have been proposals made throughout from both parties across time around there should be a family impact lens to that, right? A family impact statement. What is this going to mean for families if we do that? And some of that can be weaponized, and we have to be really careful about it.
Yeah.
I mean, parents'
Yeah.
rights has been weaponized against, against LGBTQ people. I mean, that language can be dangerous. But as an idea of we need to think about policymaking with families in the center. And interestingly, we really don't think about families as a unit very much in policymaking. We often think about individuals, that the parent is the worker, the child, as the child. We don't often think of what's best for families. And so this stuff ends up falling from the wayside. I think in some cases it's benign neglect. In some cases it's malign neglect. But I don't know that there's necessarily Congress people sitting around being like, what we're going to do is like make the airport terrible for families with kids.
No, but it's also like, and this gets to like, Protestant individualist work ethic. Like, if you're going to go on vacation, you better suffer. Or just like the idea that something, anything that makes your life easier in some way, especially if the state is doing it, like that's waste. Does that make sense? Like things are supposed to be hard and we're supposed to struggle to do them. And if we manage to do them, that makes us better people is really at the heart of like that individualist ethic, which sucks. Right? We just keep making things so hard. The Culture Study podcast is sponsored by Blue Land. One of the things that I try to do every year is just throw away less crap. Buy less crap and throw away less crap. One way that you can bring less crap into your house and throw less crap away is by reducing the amount of single-use plastics that you use in your everyday life. In the past, every single time that I needed a cleaning product, I would buy a brand new plastic thing of it. And when it got low, I would go and get another one. And this was incredibly wasteful, but at the same time, it was just low on my priorities. I needed something that was going to be really easy to implement if I was going to change that behavior. And then Blue Land sent me their products. And here's what I love about them. You have a really sturdy, meant to last spray bottle. And you use that over and over again. It's simple. It's not hideous. Like you can see what's inside of it. And then you have these tablets that come in a nice little tin. And then you open up the tablet and you put the tablet in it and you add some water. And then that's it. I use Blue Land for my hand soap. Right now I'm still using the really nice winter-themed piney one. I also use their tablets for the toilet bowl. You don't even have to like use any sort of plastic squeezy thing. You just put the tablet in there. It's fantastic. Blue Land products are certified by Cradle to Cradle and meet the highest standard of clean. They're effective yet gentle on people and on the planet. From cleaning sprays to toilet bowl cleaner to dishwasher and laundry detergent tablets, Blue Land's 100% microplastic-free, EPA Safer Choice certified formulas are safe to use around your family, your pets, your plants. I love not having to choose between the safe option and what actually gets my house clean. And right now, Blue Land has a special offer for listeners. You can get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/culture. You won't want to miss this. blueland.com/culture for 15% off. That's blueland.com/culture to get 15% off. Today's episode is brought to you by Blissy. Melody, do you ever wake up and your hair looks like you were a 2-year-old who slept for 18 hours and it's just like piled to one side?
Yes.
One thing that I didn't realize before I got a Blissy pillowcase was that a huge cause of that particular type of bedhead is actually what kind of pillowcase that you're sleeping on. Cotton and satin cause frizz. And then, they also cause those like embarrassing sleep creases where like you look like you just smashed your face into a pillow. Guess what? You don't get that with a Blissy.
I was traveling a couple of weeks ago, so I was away from my Blissy pillowcase, and I kid you not, one day my sleep creases lasted until like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Every time that I like went to the bathroom to wash my hands or whatever, I was like, why is this still happening?
They make me feel like I'm a 2-year-old who just got up from a nap and I'm like still cranky. You know what I mean? Like I need a string cheese like force fed to me. That's it. Like, if I look in the mirror, that's what they make me feel like.
Yes.
And again, you don't get that if you take a nap with a Blissy, if you sleep at night with a Blissy. Blissy pillowcases are silk. Not satin. There's a real difference. Silk is natural, cooling, gentler on skin and hair, and it also helps reduce fine lines, wrinkles, and sleep creases, like what we're talking about, and reduces breakouts, which somehow, even at age 44, I still have. Why did no one tell me this? Right now, because you're a listener, Blissy is offering 60 nights risk-free plus an additional 30% off when you shop at blissy.com/culturepod. That's BLISSY.com/culturepod and use code culturepod to get an additional 30% off. Your skin and hair will thank you. Okay, so I promised so many listeners that we would not just talk about like parents of little kids in this episode. So we have a question that's going to tee us up to be much more expansive here. Let's hear from Marissa.
How can a truly family-friendly community recognize and make space for single, childless people? Or, better yet, make single, child-free life more possible and even encouraged as a role that adds value to a community? Single people are often entire families in and of ourselves, playing a lot of different roles at once every single day. And while I love being Auntie Marissa to the kids in my life, I'm actually Auntie Marissa a pretty small percentage of the time. It is often too easy to just fill the auntie role and nothing else to kids, friends, and family alike. Are there specific ways a community can make folks who are opting out of traditional families feel visible and valuable as simply themselves?
So what does this spark in you?
It's a really good question. And it really is something that bothers me about the family formation birth rate discourse, right? And this idea that I wrote in an op-ed in opposition to this one think tank that was calling these people kinless. And I'm like, they're not kinless. Like they're not like without, they're not without families, like, right? Like they have, they're filling these important roles. And then humanity owes a great debt of gratitude to many, many, many people who ended up not being married or having kids. I think part of it is like, we need to be able to have this conversation, which is not going anywhere, about the declining birth rate without denigrating people who choose not to have kids. And part of it is literally what we're doing right now. I think saying that out loud and saying it loudly and over and over and over again. And then I think there's a question of like, can communities, like I don't have like a list of things that the community could do, but if you think about the way that we have, grandparents' day at school, right? Like, or grand friends' day, right? Can we have like, on Uncle Day, can we have ways that we are elevating these individuals, but again, not just because of their relationship to kids, but also ways to celebrate them in and of themselves. If we have parents' night out, is there a way to do more events that aren't just focused on parents? I think having both and is probably the way forward. And again, the more that we can just say that out loud, the better. So I don't have a magic wand on that one, but I'm glad it was asked, because I am getting concerned that the discourse is heading in a nasty direction.
As a person without kids, I have so many thoughts on this.
Please.
Because like there are so many spaces when like I feel awkward or not particularly welcome. One of them goes back to like the point that we made earlier about how a lot of spaces now have become either child-free or conversely only for kids. So I think about like, I don't know, these spaces that are like, now you like jump at the walls and there's like foam all over the place. Like there's, you know what I mean? Like, they're like, some of it's trampolines and like it is a stimulation overload. But if you're there without like children under your direct supervision, you're a freaking weirdo, right? So like I went with some friends with my friends' kids, and it's like, but where's your kid? And like I played more than any of the other parents. But still, it's like this interesting kind of interloper thing. One thing that I appreciate that the school does on my island is like oftentimes for things like graduation or plays or that sort of thing, they make a very explicit call that everyone on the island is welcome to come. And what that does is anyone who has an investment in the school, which is everyone, because like it is at the center of our island in so many different ways. Lots of people have either gone there themselves or had kids who went there or volunteered there or taught there. Like you have people who are there who are not just parents, including me and my partner. Oh, one other thing before I get into the policy stuff. Like I earlier this year, one of my friend's kids who I love, she had to do a report on an adult in her life for school. Every other person in the class did a family member. but she did her report on me. So she interviewed me and like got pictures of me when I was a kid and like all of this stuff. It was really special to me. But imagine if the teacher had said, you need to do this on an adult in your life who isn't related to you.
Oh, that's a great
You know what I
idea.
mean?
Yeah.
Like, so many adults would be so honored to be asked to do that. And all it takes is just that one little switch in like the curriculum. So that sort of thing, or like bring an adult you're not related to school. And if that's something that becomes a norm, I know that sounds weird, but if that becomes a norm, like it's something that parents are more conscious about cultivating so that their kid doesn't get to third grade and have no adult in their life who isn't a parent. Right. And then the policy stuff that I was just mentioning is just like, we just like the way that the suburbs and urban centers, like how they select for people who do or do not have an additional need for a bedroom, right? Or like how difficult it is in an urban area to have kids and to not have a car. Like these all interlock. And we could live, I think, in closer community with people with different family situations, because to not have kids is all, you're still a family. You're a family unit. You're just a family unit of one. That would just be so much easier. Okay. Our next question about family friendly and who benefits from that. This comes from Maggie.
How would a family-friendly society also be better for folks outside of the family structure? Workplaces that make space for care work are needed for parents, but also child-free folks who are caring for aging parents or ill partners. Maybe less obviously, if public spaces were truly accessible to parents, would this allow parents not to retreat into the nuclear family, leading to both parents and child-free folks retaining the friendship/community that many lose when they or their friends become parents?
What's your answer here?
I mean, yes. So I think, look, care has, investing in care and family-friendly societies, it has a strong curb cut effect. And the curb cut effect is this idea, right, that when originally the curb cuts were poured by disability advocates because they needed somewhere for people in wheelchairs to be able to get across the street, they are now used by everyone, right? Like so that's the idea. Huge effects, right?
Cyclists, strollers,
exactly, delivery people,
universal design, right?
Yes, millions of people use curb cuts every day. Super helpful. That was not originally why they were put in. So you could think about some of these family-friendly adjustments that could be made and the way that they could benefit. So one example I think is interesting is we think about the school street movement, right? This idea of let's make schools, our streets around schools, and in some cases child care programs, either car-free or we have to intentionally, we're lowering the speed cars can go, or we're restricting idling of cars. In some cases, places like Paris is actually completely pedestrianized, like tons of their streets around schools. That's super helpful for parents. That's super helpful for non-parents too, right? Making wide sidewalks, cleaning up the air, making accessible, vibrant art installations. All of these things can be really good for families. They're also going to help people who don't have kids, because in a lot of ways, I heard once described, I think it was the former mayor of Bogotá, Colombia, who once described children as an indicator species. Indicator species being, right, in biology, the idea of the health of this species is telling you what's going on in the rest of the ecosystem. And his point was, if things are going well by the children and by the families, that means things are going to be going well by everyone else. But things aren't going well, then right, vice versa. So I really think actually that's part of the challenge, is that when we sort of segment out, this is just something that's about care, this is just something that's about kids, doesn't have to do with the rest of society, it actually makes it harder to develop the society that we want, the neighborhoods that we want, because you're also artificially restricting the constituency in that way. It's saying everyone has an interest in this. And I think the elder care point, which I think we're going to talk about more, is so important too, particularly in our aging society. We have got to put structures in place and that are more conducive to that, and it's going to help everyone. And that can look like multi-generational housing. That can look like, I've seen more and more people are co-locating elder care services and child care services, which is super cute and also super helpful, right? That makes all the sense in the world.
Will you explain that for people who aren't familiar? It's really cool.
Yeah, so basically, like you'll have one building, right? And on one wing of that building is a child care center, and on the other wing of that building is a senior center, essentially. And so, but they'll mix, right? They'll send the kids, so you'll have the toddlers go over, and they'll do like a story time with the elderly people, and it's really adorable, and also creates right like these intergenerational connections. It's good for the seniors, but then it also means that when family members are coming to visit, again, like they're kind of interacting with both generations. So those sorts of things I think can really, and it's what does it signal as well? Like it signals that we're not segmenting out. Kids go over there, seniors go over there, right? Like we're bringing everyone together to sort of restore these ties that bind.
Yeah. And this is kind of counter to the idea of like, oh, we need more family friendly places. Like, obviously, of course, I want more places where I can hang out with my friends in public spaces. But also, more robust childcare would mean that I would get to hang out with my friends without their kids a lot more. Because right now, it's just like, it's so unaffordable and inaccessible that those spaces to not hang out with kids are also incredibly difficult to come by. And sometimes you do want to hang out with your kids. That's the thing. Like kids don't always have to be there.
No, that's absolutely right. And how do we marshal community resources to that too, right? Like if we have, I always joke, like we have those First Friday art walks, like a lot of communities have, right? Like what if we did, third Thursday's care night, right? And everyone's going to come out and we're going to provide, centralized places of care, and we're going to all go out and, everyone's going to have time to engage. Like there are lots of creative ways to do this. I've read about a few restaurants that have started to basically have like temporary sort of like childcare kind of associated like on next door or above them in like the second floor of the restaurant. And like there are lots of ways to do this, because you're right, like part of society is gonna you need time with the kids. You also need time without the kids, whether or not you have kids.
Yeah. The next question is about something that I think about a ton, which is how oftentimes not only is a lot of this discourse focused on like people with two parents who have kids, it's focused specifically on like how can we make the mom's lives easier. Whew. So this next question comes from Kelly, and Melody's going to read it.
How can we keep queer parents in the mix of these conversations about family-friendly society, especially baby-friendly society? I'm a heterosexual new mom, and I've become very aware of the support available to me that isn't available to my husband's boss, who is a gay man with an adopted daughter the same age as my son. I'm all for girl power or mom power, but why are parenting classes so femme-coded? If it isn't specifically about post-birth recovery, why are baby-friendly workout classes all for moms? My husband also wants to be an informed, involved parent, but he isn't invited into these spaces the way that I am. I even live in a liberal city, and I've been disappointed at how traditional gender roles-y things are.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a chance for you to talk about what it's like to be a man in these spaces, like because you were able to observe it from that place. Like, what have you noticed?
Yeah, it is not the. I mean, she's right. These places are not the most welcoming for men, and even I remember when my kids were younger and taking them to the playground, and like I've always felt like a weird pressure to somehow assert the fact that like they were my kids and I was here with kids, right? Yes. Like, which I don't think that my general sense from talking to my wife is it's not the sense that most women have. So that's absolutely true. It's also, I think, sometimes harder to find that community as men. The sort of dad chat is not quite as robust, I think, as the mom chat and things like that. What's interesting is I think we're in this transitional moment where we haven't quite gotten there yet. So, for example, at this point, 1 in 5 stay-at-home parents is a father. Which is way more than it used to be, right? It also means that 4 in 5 stay-at-home parents are still women. So but with that number of dads, like there's sort of this need. But when you talk to them, like a lot of times there is this sense of isolation, sense of I don't have these spaces that are welcoming to me. Actually, they look askance at me if I show up in these spaces. So I think we need to continue as we develop these offerings, finding ways to intentionally let men in. And it is, again, possible. I mean, the U.S. is in other countries. I get that. But it's interesting. It is in Denmark, I believe, that I was reading about. They have a term for it. It basically translates to latte dads. But it's all the, it's this idea of like the dads will go out and they'll meet up and they'll get caught. Like it's a trope because there are so many of them. And this is the other thing we haven't talked about yet.
Paternity leave.
Paternity leave, exactly. Yes.
Non-birth parent leave.
Yes.
Because that, I think, is a better term here to
It is a much
describe
better term. You're right.
all of the different roles
Yes.
because this could be adoptive parents too,
Yep.
right? Like, so what does leave look like when you have not given physical birth?
Yes.
And I love that you bring up the latte dads because I have such a vivid picture in my mind. I was in Bergen, Norway. I was like walking past the museum and I saw two dads, like, well-dressed Norwegian dads with two strollers with babies in them who were between the ages of 1 and 2, which from my understanding in Norwegian society and a lot of Scandinavian societies, usually the man takes the second kind of end of the parental leave. And they were just like hanging out being guys with their babies.
Yep.
Like they were just, like they were walking like past the museum with like, I think they had coffees, like, and it was so absolutely normalized. And it's possible because there is not just like it's use it or lose it paternity leave.
Yes.
And that just, there's so many trickle down effects. Just can you spell out why we are so resistant to non-birth parent?
Non-birth parent. We're resistant to all kinds of leave. I would argue, unfortunately, in this country.
Yes.
No, it is right. Like, this is. I really think a cultural moment that we are in, and we actually all have agency in where it goes. So, do you remember? Like, I remember every so often this will come with like a professional athlete, right? Like a male professional athlete who will their spouse will give birth, and then they'll
they're golfing,
right?
Like they're playing the Masters,
exactly, and they'll take like 2 days off. And they'll get, all sorts of, kind of yelled at, and there'll be Sports Center segments about it because it'll become this big thing. But actually, it's because I think it's currently contested. Like that idea of, like, is paternity leave, like, is it appropriate? Like, because you still hear all the crap about, like, oh, well, what's the dad even doing? He's just hanging out, right? Like, or what's the non-birthing parent even doing? And like, I think we are reaching a point where enough non-birthing parents are starting to have those experiences. I'm starting to speak up about it. We're in. I'm hopeful that if we have this conversation 10 years from now, things will look very different. But I think it is a legacy very much of this one's misogyny. Let's put it that way. I think this one is very much like the idea of men don't have a role to play. Or non-birthing parents don't have a role to play in it, and we have got to keep fighting it, and we have to fight for better maternity leave too. We should say that too. Like it is insane.
And the fear I have is once again that this it becomes the paragon of like the private sector in terms of like, oh well, if you work for a quote unquote good company, then they have more progressive non-birth parent leave policies. But if you, and I think actually in various states too, have been like trying to increase leave policies. And then it just leaves the rest of the country and the rest of like workers or especially people who don't work for places with benefits, just like shit out of luck. And that's why I feel like the cultural shift doesn't happen because we continue to place the responsibility in this private sphere.
That's absolutely right. And then you get those inequities too, because it's the more affluent kind of white collar workers who have access to, and it's not lower income workers and the disproportionately workers of color. And then you get this weird 2-tier system, which is, I mean, look, the private sector is not saving us here. Like the corporations cannot create a family-friendly society. They can be part of it, and I think actually thinking about things like flexible. And you've written lots about this, right? Like thinking about things like flexible work hours, predictable scheduling. Like these are all things that is at a company level and that they could do. But why are we asking companies to provide paid? That should be a national paid leave law. We should have national and state-funded, child care and leave. Like that is the only thing that makes sense. And look. Again, it's not news, but the United States and Papua New Guinea are the only 2 countries in the world with a national maternity leave law. Like it is absolutely absurd.
Without one.
The only 2 ones without without national maternity leave law, much less non-birthing parent leave, and that's one where I feel like every time like this issue comes up around like parents and stay at home and all that, I'm like, can we like it's a paid leave conversation when they're infants at least, and like I feel like it needs to be brought up. I've made a pledge that every time I talk about childcare from here on, I'm going to at least include like one line about paid leave because we've separated them and it's weird.
Doesn't this just circle back to the question at the top of our conversation, which is that there is still this fantasy space held closely by conservative legislators that if the birthing parent is staying at home, then why would they need leave, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that,
yeah.
so why would we need policy
Right.
if what we actually want is a scenario where this person is not working outside of
Yeah.
the home?
It is. It is there. You're absolutely right. And it is absolutely a thread there. I think it is. I am sensing a degree of loosening for, I think, two reasons. One is
Yeah.
because, look, across the country, around 70% of children under the age of 6 have all of their available parents in the workforce. And much as
Yeah.
legislators don't like that, that means that in rural Idaho and rural Alabama and, everywhere else, like there are a ton of families that have all of their available parents working. Actually, it's higher in rural and lower income areas because from economic necessity. So it really does cut across every line of difference. There's still those curmudgeony old white legislators male
Well,
legislators,
and I'll
but
say they're never poor. They're always
oh,
upper middle class. Like they
absolutely,
always own a fucking car dealership and are like,
yes,
my wife doesn't work and yours shouldn't either, you
yes.
know?
But look, I will.
God.
I'm gonna say with the faintest amount of praise I can provide something nice about Katie Britt, the senator from Alabama, which is that at the very least she is willing to step and say, like, look, this that's not a reality for everyone, and
Yeah,
we are
yeah.
going to need to have an external childcare system. And I think that's the other change we're seeing is younger
Yeah.
legislators, even younger Republican legislators, are coming
Yeah.
or saying at least or acknowledging the need for an external childcare system, acknowledging the need for
Yeah.
better relief. Now, are they willing to pay for it instead of giving giant tax breaks to rich corporate friends? That's that's a separate question.
Yeah. Support for the Culture Study podcast comes from Ollie. You know what? My poor dog Steve, he's just a sensitive boy. Some days he's like, oh, I just don't feel like eating today. We've taken him to the vet a couple different times to make sure that there's nothing wrong with his blood work. He doesn't have IBS. He is just a cranky, sensitive boy. But the thing, whenever we're trying to prompt him to start eating again, the thing that always works is Ollie. We put a little bit of it on his dry food every time, and it's like a magic trick. It is fantastic. The quality of Ollie is just so high that it kind of makes me jealous. I know that's weird to say, but it does. Sometimes I'm like, what if we made this into a stew? So it's human grade recipes backed by vet nutritionists and crafted by culinary experts. Dogs love the taste. I can absolutely attest to this. Even the pickiest eaters like Steve will show more excitement during mealtime. You can also tailor your meal plan to meet your dog's specific needs. Maybe you want your dog to only have Ollie. Maybe you use it as a topper like I do. It's also perfectly portioned and you get it in this fantastic mess-free packaging, which is so much better than cans. I cannot say this enough. It's great and it doesn't make you feel like you are shoving dog food in your refrigerator. Your dog's well-being starts with their food, and that's why Ollie delivers fresh, human-grade food that your dog will love. Head to ollie.com/culture, tell them all about your dog, and use code CULTURE to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, Ollie offers a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/culture and enter code CULTURE to get 60% off your first box. Today's episode is sponsored by Wild Alaskan Company. So, Melody, we just got a new shipment of Wild Alaskan.
Ooh.
There was a bunch of salmon, and I had been really wanting to try this fantastic ginger miso salmon curry with basil. That's from the New York Times. We used the coho salmon, and it was so good. It was fantastic. Wild Alaskan Company is the best way to get wild-caught, perfectly portioned, nutrient-dense seafood delivered directly to your door so that you can also make the ginger miso basil salmon curry tonight. It's so good, seriously. We're talking about 100% wild-caught, never farmed fish. This means there are no antibiotics, GMOs, or additives. Just clean, real fish that support healthy oceans and fishing communities. They're nutrient-rich, full of flavor, and sustainably sourced. They're wild-caught from Alaska, and every order supports sustainable harvesting practices. Plus, your membership delivers flexible shipments, expert tips, and truly feel-good seafood. If you're not completely satisfied with your first box, Wild Alaskan Company will give you a full refund. No questions asked, no risk, just high-quality seafood. Not all fish are the same. Get seafood you can trust. Go to wildalaskan.com/culture for $35 off your first box of premium wild-caught seafood. That's wildalaskan.com/culture for $35 off your first order. Thanks to Wild Alaskan Company for sponsoring this episode. Okay, next question is about something that comes up all the time in the culture study comments on so many different issues. It just kind of funnels down to this question. So I would love your take on it. This comes from Kate.
How do we create a family-friendly society that recognizes multiple kinds of family obligations? For example, we are in the throes of RTO, where there will be flexible work arrangements made only for parents, like for pickup and drop-off. I obviously want parents to have flexibility. I do not want this benefit taken away. At the same time, those of us who are childless are not eligible for flexible arrangements. Why are policies like this so often focused on the very nuclear family? How do we create a set of additive or expansive policies that recognize the vast number of kinds of family obligations?
I also want to, as we proceed with this conversation, think about obligations to the self.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is someone who has a disability, someone who has chronic migraines, someone who has IBS, all sorts of things as part of family care and family obligation. Because I think we have this weird fetishization of it's okay to go care for one and for someone else, but not for yourself.
Yeah.
You should tough it out. So have you heard of places that are actually doing this well?
I pause because I don't know that there are, I'm sure, individual corporations and companies that are doing this better.
Yeah.
It's the challenge, I think, is this, and you may not agree with this, and that's totally fine. I think two things can be true at the same time. I think one thing is that all workers, all, people in this country should have access to the flexibility and the support they need in order to flourish and in order to meet their care obligations. Whether that care obligation is to an elderly parent, to a dependent, to themselves, to your point.
A dog.
Right.
A dog.
Sure.
Sometimes you got to take your dog to the
vet.
Yeah.
And I'm going to assert that there is a uniqueness about parents with minor children that goes above and beyond that. And part of that is because you have the child is involved in that situation. And so, for example,
a dependent.
There's a dependent, and and in that case, child development is literally occurring as a result of how stressed or not stressed that parent is, right? Whether they're what kind of functioning that family has, how stable that relationship is. So that's one thing. The other thing, obviously, is that in terms of the broader societal reproduction, and it is not fun to talk about in these terms, but I think it's fair to talk about them in this conversation in these terms. We do need to have a new generation coming up behind the existing one. They need to be healthy optimally, right? They need to be able to engage, and ideally both in their sort of moment of having a happy and healthy childhood, and also when they will become citizens and they will become, people who are early, right? So there is, I think, and that logic doesn't necessarily apply to the pet as much, right? What I described. So I think we need to be able to say, yes, everyone should have what they need. And also there's a reason parents with children, and this is one I do extend. I do think as we continue to have an aging society, thinking about elder care as well, because that's a dependent in a way. Those two sides of things really occupy, can I say first among equals when it comes to care needs? And so what I don't want to happen though is this idea of, and then it all just gets dumped. That's to me a sign of poor management. Because now we get more to your element, man. We're talking about if you have companies that are short staffing themselves intentionally, right? Or staffing with as lean as possible, just in time, right? And then, when one person has to leave because their kid got sick and they need to go pick them up from school or childcare early.
Who picks up the slack?
Right.
Right.
If you actually staff with some slack, and then it's okay. And again, we can look at other countries that do this much better. That sort of have ethics and norms around this, understanding that like, look, kids get sick, right? Like, and so that's gonna happen. We know what's gonna happen, so we can plan for it. Instead, we have an economy where many companies are doing their very best to not have any slack on the line because it would mean less profit.
Well, and that such great points. I'm glad you brought in the elder care part because I think that often is a similar scenario. Or I think caring for someone else who is dependent on you for whatever reason, right? So
Yeah,
like a sibling who needs that sort of
sure.
care. But I would also say that if we create policies that make greater family friendliness, right? Then you wouldn't have to leave in the middle of the day to pick up your kids from school at 2:30 because there would be great aftercare opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do think that flex work does facilitate this a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but not in perfect ways. But as things are now, I think that the growing divide, or maybe divide is not the right word, the festering animosity between people with kids and
Yeah.
without kids, which I see very much all over the internet, I think it is exacerbated by situations like this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And as you said, like if they would staff appropriately, then this would not be an issue. But that it's often even worse because of understaffing or just-in-time staffing.
Yeah.
The other thing that it makes me think of is similar to the curb cut example. Like, what if workplaces had just like big bucket of leave
Yeah.
and you could use it for parental leave, you
Mm-hmm.
could use it for elder care leave, you could use it to take a sabbatical. Like, there's so many things you could
Yeah.
use it for. And that would, I think, change some of the dynamics around it. But I think that what some people would say is like, well, then no one's going to have kids if they could just take a vacation to Europe, right? But that's not the case. People still have kids,
Right.
even with all
Yes.
of the other difficulties
Right.
that we have.
Yes. Absolutely. The overwhelming majority of people still have and want kids. So
They
yes.
will still choose the kids.
Yes. That's right.
Um, okay, so last question, I think. Let's do this one about part-time work. This comes from Caroline.
Are there any companies or industries that have actually done a good job allowing parents flexibility in the workplace? My mom friends and I are often lamenting the lack of part-time opportunities for white-collar professional workers like ourselves, lawyers, consultants, MBAs, since two-parent full-time employment is so hard to swing with kids. Likely some of the intransigence is a product of client service industries, but I'm wondering whether there are flex time, part-time, or job-sharing arrangements that have been proven to work in certain companies or industries, or even in other countries. Are there models that could help U.S. employers relinquish their attachment to the default 40 or even 50 or 60-hour work week without forcing all of us to become freelance?
So when I was researching out of office, I was so surprised by just what a divide there was between the US and so many different
Mm-hmm.
countries when it comes to the availability of part-time work.
Yeah.
And like it's really this almost like zero-sum game in the United States. Like there are so few ways to work part-time, which is in part why a lot of women get involved with MLMs.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole nother place for us
Yeah.
to go.
Yeah.
But like, do you have any thoughts? Or, like, what is your thinking about how the lack of part-time work influences all of this?
I think it's a huge problem, actually, and I'm glad
Yeah.
you mentioned the examples. And yes, when you have countries there, that's an expectation. There is much more job sharing, right? It's much easier to take extended leaves, and someone comes in temporarily, and is much more transient. In that respect, so there are two challenges with the part-time worker. One is that there isn't enough of those options. The other is what exists often is a trap, right? Because they'll keep you at 29 hours
Yes.
and then they won't let you
Yes.
out, right? And so that's the other huge
Yeah.
problem is actually we don't. So what part-time work does exist is a often not what families need anyways. Actually, it's interesting. When you look at surveys of particularly working class individuals, by and large, parents say part-time work is ideal for them, right? For exactly the reason that
Yes.
they right, like that great, that's more flexible. I can work some and do some. care. I don't have to pay for as much childcare. All of that's good. So there have been proposals from time to time. Yuri Bronfenbrenner was this great child development expert back in the 70s, and he talked in the 70s about this idea of a part-time kind of worker bill of rights, basically, which has been adopted. Actually, I think Senator Warren introduced a version of it a while back. But this idea of you can't keep part-time workers just below enough hours to give them health insurance. Like, you have to be able to offer them opportunities for more hours, things like that. So I think that's one thing that could help. But the other thing is going to be, I think, this entire ethic of, again, job sharing would be interesting to see more and more companies go into that. So, for example, this in many other countries, because of their strong leave policies, like there's this idea of like a temporary assignment is very common, right? Like, I'm going to come on for 6 months to a year and cover this person's job, and then I'm going to move along because they're going to come back to work. Like, we just don't have very much of that here. So
because the leave isn't that long.
The leave isn't that long, right? Yes.
No, like you see the vestiges of it at the academic level because sabbaticals were built into the model of academia. They're going away, but that if you every 7 years, say, you get a full year off, or every 4 years you get a half year off. And so they instituted a policy of they hire a visiting professor who comes for a full year.
Yeah.
And covers that job, right? Yeah. Or like they'll cover one person is taking one semester and another semester, then that professor will take that full year off. But we don't do that with our other jobs because the leave isn't that long.
Yes. And I come back honestly to this idea, and we talked about earlier about like, why are we not seeing these changes, is I think there needs to be an organized constituency for this idea of a family-friendly agenda. And I actually think, particularly as the Democrats are soul searching for what's next, right? This idea of family policy, and it could be really interesting. This idea of we're actually going to move, like, I will tell you, I've always thought the idea of solve after school and summer care has got to be the lowest hanging fruit for any politician. You would get 125% of the vote if you said, of the parents, if you said that you were going to fix after school, right, and summer care. But we don't, because we have this general sort of sense, and I think it is still a vestige of the Great Society, where we look to programs instead of to policy, and this idea of an overarching sense of how do we organize our society, how do we organize our funding, how do we organize our government in ways that support an overarching goal. And if the overarching goal is the stability and quality of family life in all of its forms, that leads you in very, very different places than if the goal is to maximize the labor force participation rate or maximize the GDP or things like that, right? Where we go back to, with Bobby Kennedy Sr. in his famous speech about how the GDP can tell us everything except about what makes us proud to be Americans. Like, these are very, it's philosophical in a sense, but that's the deepest answer to all of these questions, is like, we have to put families at the center, and then we have to push our politicians that we don't just want a laundry list of programs, useful as they might be. Like, we want all of society push and an agenda that is going to get us from this crap, the place that we are, where everything is harder than it needs to be, to your point, possibly intentionally, to a place where everyone can thrive and can have the family that they want, which may include kids or may not. But right now, all we're doing is we've sort of turned over our choice set to the raw and uncaring maw of the economy, the free market economy.
Totally. Well, and this makes me think, too, that part of that policy, and this is why I think it's so difficult to get people on board, like, part of that family-friendly policy, and this touches every single thing that we've talked about today, would be universal health care.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Like, if you disarticulate healthcare from your job.
Yes.
It changes so much. If you disarticulate, like, your access to elder care.
Yes.
From like your ability to like afford elder care insurance when you're in a particular job, and like to buy into that at a specific time in your, like, the chance to buy into that in your life. Like, if we just cared for people.
Yes. Right.
How much would change?
Yes.
Right?
This is, as an aside, why I'm so nervous about this push for employer-sponsored childcare. Like, let's not tie childcare to employment, please. Mary, you're absolutely right. This is this question of, Alyssa Strauss in her books, When You Care, talks about this idea of a care ethics and that it's actually part of the social contract. We just don't talk
Yep.
about it, right? Like, but we need to start talking. We need to make care visible because it underlies everything that we are trying to do. And if we don't address it, then yeah, we end up in this place where you're in a thicket.
Well, and right now, I think that most people would say that we are a society that privileges family above all else, but does not actually create policy that reflects that idea,
Yes,
right?
we
Like there
rhetorically,
is,
yes, I agree.
yes,
Yeah,
rhetorically
yes,
and ideologically, but
yes,
do not legislate or create policy or not programs
yeah,
policy that reflect that prioritization.
yeah,
And it's like to me that is the discrepancy that is at the heart of like so much
yes,
sadness and difficulty, and also at the heart, I think, of the dropping birth rate, because what we see in our society is like people saying like you are only valuable if you have kids, but also it fucking sucks,
mm-hmm.
like, and deal with it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think it's right. I mean, you brought up healthcare. Can I also add one in? Like, this also goes back to like wages too. Like, if you
Yeah.
trap people in low wage jobs, then yeah, they're also they don't even control for their own time. Like, I mean, it's
Yep.
really hard to find that sense of hope and forward thinkingness that makes you wanna, engage in these sorts of future activities. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Elliot, this has been a pleasure and an infuriating pleasure.
And if you're, I don't know about that on my business card. It's an infuriating pleasure. And Helen
If
Peters.
anyone wants to like if you're interested in combining this like larger level policy thinking with a really like the history, like you bring it all together. You have a fantastic newsletter. I also recommend people seek out your books. Can you tell us about your most recent one?
Yeah, my most recent book is called Raising a Nation, 10 Reasons Every American Has a Stake in Childcare for All. And it's basically making this values-based argument, this rights-based argument that whether or not one has kids, we desperately need a strong and well-funded childcare system.
And we will of course direct people to your newsletter in the show notes. Where else can people find your work on the internet if they want to find more from you?
Yeah, so capita.org, like per capita without the per, is it's a think tank that I work for. I write a lot there. I also work with New America's Better Life Lab as well. So, but yeah, I'm all around. And I would say too, let me plug if I can. I'm a board member for an organization called Chamber of Mothers, which really helps bring mothers together, helps them understand these policy issues and work collectively for change. So I would also say for any of your listeners who are interested in taking action, that'd be my first stop, and you can find them on the internet real easily.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Today, paid subscribers got an Ask Anna Anything segment about what happens when your kids' friends don't like you. If you want to support the show and always get that bonus content, head to patreon.com/culturestudy/join. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive advice time segment, and weekly discussion threads for each episode. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts because we have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise you don't want to miss any of them. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod or check the show notes for a link. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.